Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Kaf Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Ruthie, Ira, Elsa, Juliana, Ruben, Elia, Adele, Emmanuel, and Ariane in honor of Alana Storch's birthday. Mom Safta, we so admire the example you set for all of us in your commitment to Talmud Torah. We love you. Happy birthday. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started now with a continuation of the discussion between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish in their debate about what is Isho, is a fire liable because of mamono, because it's your property, that's Rish Lakish, or Rabbi Yochanan who said because it's chitzav, it's like your actions, right? So mamono puts it more in the category of shor, bor, and all those other damages. But if you say it's kocho, it's from the actions of a person, like shooting arrows, then it goes into the category of adam mu'ad olam, about person who's always responsible for their actions, and we'll see what the ramifications are. So now we're going to start with the bottom, toward the bottom of Kaf Bet Amabet. Amar Rava, Kcha umatnita mesea leil Rabbi Yochanan. So we have a pasuk and a braita that supports Rabbi Yochanan. Kra dichtiv, ki tetzei esh, tetzei me'atzma. The pasuk starts off, ki tetzei esh, as if it started on its own. Yishalem hamavir tabeira, but then it says the person who made the fire pays, which sounds like shma mino, ishum mishum chitzav. So it starts with saying as if the fire happens on its own, meaning it's like your animal goes off on its own. It's mama. But then it finishes with the person who made the fire, he's the one responsible, or she's the one responsible. So that makes it sound like it's the person who caused the fire. So the continuation of the pasuk proves that it's not the first option, but the second. Matnita detanya, so the braita, as it says in a braita, patacha katuv. Now this can be the same proof. It's just a braita says exactly this. Patacha katuv b'niskei mamon v'siyem b'niskei gufo. Lamar lo isho mishum chitzav. So again, it starts off sounding like it's your property because it just says a fire breaks out. But then it says the person who lit the fire, which means it's saying that it's not because it's your property, it's because it's like your arrows, like your direct actions. Amar Rava. Rava says that Abai had the following problem or question. If you say it's the arrows of a person, then why should you be exempt from something hidden? We learned that if there's something hidden under a pile of wheat, let's say, or a pile of hay, and it's a shirt which doesn't belong there, right? You're going to be exempt from that. Now, Rashi says, what's really the gist of his question? Rashi brings two things. First of all, we're going to learn that a person is liable for his actions or her actions, whether it's onus, right? Whether it's beyond your control. Now, something hidden that you didn't know about is definitely beyond your control, but it doesn't matter. Or whether you intended or didn't intend, you're liable no matter what. So it shouldn't exempt Talmud. And another reason Rashi gives is a chetz. What does a chetz do? An arrow pierces underneath something, like it could go under the ground and pierce under the ground and destroy something. So basically, arrow, either which way you look at it, if you say chitzav, right, mishum chitzav, either which way a person should be liable for something hidden. To which they answer, ונפלה כגון ונפלה דלקה לאותו חצר, ונפלה גדר שלא מחמת דלקה. והלכה והדליקה והזיקה בחצר אחרת. תהתם קלו לא חיצב. So let's just start with the last words. We want to find a case where you're no longer, it's on account of your direct actions. So what happened in this case? You made a fire in someone's field. Then there was a fence, some kind of fence, obviously wasn't made of wood. It was a fence that was made of some non-flammable material that would have stopped the fire from going next door. Maybe a wall is more like it. And that fell down. Now, once you lit the fire, the fence fell down. Now, so that means that basically your fire that you created, let's go to Ruth. Ruth made a fire in Naomi's field. It wasn't supposed to go to the next door field to Yael's field. It was just going to destroy Naomi's field. But the wall between Naomi and Yael's field falls down, and the fire goes then on its own. So now, then kalu lo chitzav. At that point, that's like tamun, because tamun is something you didn't really see. It wasn't really where the fire was supposed to go. It wasn't a result of your direct actions. Then you'll be exempt because that's considered tamun. But what's the problem? It doesn't really mean that anything beyond there is going to be exempt. It's only hidden things in Yael's field are going to be exempt. And that actually makes no sense. If you're going to say, well, beyond what you intended, you're not going to be responsible for because you're only responsible for your direct actions. And this happened because the fence just happened to fall right then. Again, they would have to be that the fence didn't fall because of the fire. Fence fell for some other reason. well, then you should be responsible for anything revealed in Yael's field and not just for things hidden. So that doesn't make any sense, to which in the end we're going to have to say, no, it's just going to lead to other questions, but we're going to say that really all along we thought Rish Lakish said mamon and Rabbi Yochanan said chitzav and total machlok. No, it turns out Rabbi Yochanan who said chitzav also holds mamon. This, by the way, is very similar in Gitin with the whole machlok at Rabba and Rava. Is it Lishma or is it Edim Mitzuyim? And then we in the end say, oh, Rabbi Ilay de Rava, okay, that he in the end agrees with it, right? That one of the sides takes both of them. They have to say it's both, otherwise it doesn't make any sense, right? The one who said Lishma also has to say, it's also we're worried about Edim, right, finding witnesses. In any case, same thing here. To which the Gemara says, now, what would be the case? Then let's go back to the case of the fire. So the fire, Ruth lights in Naomi's field. Then it spreads to Yael's field. Now, it would have to be a case. When is Ruth going to be liable for what goes beyond the fence? Now, what's the issue? We're going to have to find where she's liable for things that are revealed, but not things that are hidden. It would have to be a case where the fence fell down. But Ruth realized, oh, I lit a fire in Naomi's field. It's going to go to Yael's field. And somehow she has enough time, whatever the scenario is, she has enough time to rebuild the fence, the barrier. And she doesn't. Then at this point, the fire is no longer going from her koch, right? She lit the fire's, right? And it wasn't from her act or original act, it wasn't supposed to go to Yael's field. Now, by not putting up that barrier, Rabbi Yochanan will say she's now liable because of mamonot. This is very much like dahatam shorohu v'lo tapach ba'apeh. It's like having a shore and not putting a barrier, a fence around, and letting the animal go around in the wild. Same thing. You have a fire you created, and now, which is now yours, and it's the beginning action that you destroyed Naomi's field was because you created it, your actions. Now you have a fire that's yours because you created it, and if you don't stop it from going to the next door field, then your mammon, something you created, is actually going to destroy someone else's field. That's the part that becomes mammon here. And then we're going to say, comes in the law of Tamun. In the field of Yael, now in the field of Naomi, even hidden things are going to be liable because you're liable for everything because you damaged. But when it turns into mammon in Yael's field, when the fence fell down and you didn't fix it, and you could have, then you're going to basically be responsible for anything revealed, but not anything hidden, because that already is, once it's your property, then we can already come up with exemptions, right? We can say, now, why we come up with this exemption of Tamun? It was a drasha on the pasuk. So we're going to say the drasha on the pasuk is only when it's your mammon, not if it's your direct actions. Now they say, well, if you hold, right, Rabbi Yochanan holds it's your arrows, and also it's your mammon, so my benayu. So what's the difference between them? So ika benayu, if really in the end you hold like Rish Lakish also. So what's the nafkamina? As we say, well, the relevance of saying it's kocho means that as a person, you're liable for 4 things. Meaning, what are the 4 things? Remember, now, this is not if you destroyed someone's field, but if in the process of making this fire, let's say Ruth lights a fire in Naomi's field, and Naomi gets damaged. Now, if you damage a person directly, you're liable for 4 things. You're actually liable for 5. Okay, so Rashi says the one missing here, and there's a bit of a debate about this, but we'll go with Rashi here. The one that's missing is boshet. You're not liable for embarrassment. That's the one. Okay, there's nezek, tzal, ripoy, shevet, boshet. Okay, damages, the pain you caused, the doctor's bills, the shevet, the amount of time, the amount of loss from not going to work. And boshet. Now, boshet is the embarrassment, the humiliation. That you only pay if you intended to damage. Here, she intended to damage, but she didn't intend to damage Naomi. She didn't think Naomi was going to come out when she was trying to destroy the field, probably. So there's no boshet payment. That's the assumption here, although there's different ways you can understand this. In any case, the point is, if you view it as kocho, also in addition to mamon, right? The kocho, kolo, the first part, Naomi's field is kocho, you're going to be liable for the 4 things. Whereas you're not going to be reliable for that. You're only going to be reliable for damage if you don't think it's kocho and you just think it's your property damaging. Because, like, for example, if a shore attacks a person, you don't pay all those 5 things. So, and in this case, it would be 4. Okay. That's the end of that section. Now we're going to move back to the dog and the chararan, the cake that's attached to the coals. So now we want to clarify a few things about this case. Number one, okay, remember on the eating, the dog ate the cake, full damages. When they put the coal down or the coal fell, depending on how we read it and whether it's Shiur or whether it's Karen, then it destroys the heap of hay or whatever it might be. We're going to make you responsible only for half damages. But the main part right now is the cake. Man chayav, who's liable? Obviously, Baal HaKelef, right? The owner of the dog is responsible to pay. But they say, but the chayv nami Baal Gachelet, the owner of the coal, that we're assuming, right? The owner of the dog didn't put up the cake. It's someone else's cake and it's someone else's coal. The owner of the coal should be partially responsible because their coal burnt the field. So they should at least split the cost. So they say, no. No, in other words, the original thought here was that if the dog takes the coal, well, why was the coal in a place where the dog could take it? That's his responsibility for leaving something that's hazardous around, right? The owner of the coal. So it must be that the owner of the coal protected the area where the coal was and had a whole fence around it and it was protected. Now we're going to have to say, if so, how'd the dog get in? But right now we're going to assume the owner of the coal is not responsible at all because they did their protection the way they were supposed to. Well, if the field was totally protected where the coal was or the area where it was, then how did the dog get there? It must be the dog snuck underneath the gate. Amar Rav Mary, Bered Rav Kana, Zot Omeret, Stam Dlatot Chaturot and Etzel Kelef. So comes Rav Mary, the son of Rav Kana, and says we can learn from here that if you build a fence that basically keeps out lots of things, but dogs can slip underneath, that's still considered protected. And that's right. An average door doesn't actually protect from dogs getting in, sneaking in from underneath. Okay, so now we've established that it's only the owner of the dog responsible. The owner of the coal is not responsible in the event that they protected their coal and it wasn't left out in a place where it was easy to access. Now we're going to say the achlahecha. Where was this eaten? Now, kind of it sounded like there were three people. Okay, let's go back to Ruth, Naomi, and Yael. So Ruth has a dog. Naomi has a field. And Yael is the owner of the cake and the coal. So it sounded like Ruth's dog went into Yael's house. And in fact, the previous sugya assumed that there were three people because it said maybe the one, Yael, who owned the coal, maybe she's responsible for the damage done in Naomi's field, right? Basically, the dog takes the food and the coal together to Naomi's field, eats the food, drops the coal, and does damage in Naomi's field. But now they're going to say, no, not really. Ta'achlahecha, where did the dog eat? If the dog took Yael's food and ate it in Naomi's field, well, we have a problem here. In order to be liable for shame, we've already learned this. You have to take the food and eat it in the reshut, the domain of the person who you damaged. And she took Yael's food and ate it in Naomi's field. That you shouldn't be responsible for that. So therefore, they say it must be not that. It must be that you ate it in the field of Naomi, who is the owner also of the coal and the cake. So basically, forget Yael. She's out of the picture now. We have the owner of the dog, Ruth. Ruth's dog goes into Naomi's field, takes her cake and the coal, eats the cake, drops the coal, burns, makes a fire in Naomi's field. So then the Gemara says, and this is a very complicated line to understand, and I won't promise to explain it perfectly well because I don't. Commentaries struggle with it, and I definitely struggled with it. But tifshov de pi para, moving now to Amabet, kechatzer hanizakdan. The fact that right now we're going to say that Ruth is liable for her dog who ate Naomi's cake in Naomi's field proves that what? The animal of a para, which in this case is the dog, but the animal of a cow, because the question was asked about a cow, we'll see in a minute, but the animal of the dog is, now if Ruth's dog is in Naomi's field, even though it's in the mouth of the dog, which theoretically you could say that's in the domain of Ruth, because now this is what's strange, we're going to say the dog's mouth is like in the domain of itself, like in Ruth's domain. We'll talk about it soon. Again, a very weird concept. It's like the chatzar of the nizak, okay? it's not considered Ruth's domain, even though it's her animal, even though it's in the mouth of the animal, which kind of is secondary to the body of the animal, and the body of the animal is owned by Ruth, which then you might say, oh, this is Ruth's property. No, it happens since it was in Naomi's field, who cares that the damage happened in the mouth of the animal, it's considered the chatzar of the nizak. Why? And how can you prove it from here? Well, it's obvious. And this is where also the line gets a little complicated. But if you say that the mouth of the dog, we're going to see in a minute that they had this big question about the mouth of a cow. If you say that the mouth of a dog is like in the domain of Ruth's, then Ruth could say, what was your food doing in my dog's mouth? In other words, don't blame me for the fact that my dog ate your food. What was the food doing there? And meaning, just like if Naomi walked into Ruth's house and got damaged, Ruth could say, what were you doing coming into my house? So what was your food doing in the mouth of my dog, which is like my house? Obviously, we don't say that, okay? Although it's not so obvious because we're going to ask this question. So already there's a lot of questions. What is going on here? This is totally obvious. Of course, you wouldn't think the mouth isn't. First of all, there would never be shame, which is actually what the Gemara is going to say. Because what is shame? The animal eats in someone else's courtyard. Obviously, it's considered someone else's courtyard if the animal's eating it. So the Gemara is going to ask that. But Rashi understands this simply, that really there's this thought that maybe the mouth of the animal eating damage and eating something in someone else's field would be considered its own domain. It's very complicated to really think that someone would even think that and that they would ask this question. Now, the answer is going to be it's not. But the fact that they even think it is weird. So Tosfot says we must be talking about a case where somebody shoved the food into the dog's mouth, and the somebody would have to be someone who's not liable, like a minor, or a chiresh shoter katan, a deaf mute, or someone who doesn't have sound mind. Then they can't be responsible. They shoved the food in the dog's mouth. They can't be responsible. The dog can't be responsible. So the dog could say, oh, my mouth, the owner of the dog could say, my dog's mouth, that's like my courtyard, It's like my property, even though it happens to be standing in your property, but someone stuck it in their mouth. It wasn't their fault. It's a little strange that the Gemara says it here because the dog actually put it, and the dog took the cake himself and decided to put the cake in his mouth. So something is complicated to understand here, and that's why Rashi and Tosfot argue exactly what the case is, and each one has to explain certain parts of the sugya that don't work out as well according to them. So I'm going to leave it there because I find it complicated to explain, but there seems to be either, we're talking really simple, like in a simple, not simple to understand, but a simple reading, that any case of shame, basically, we're going to have a problem with Chatzer and Izak. How would that ever happen? Or we're talking about a unique case when someone shoved it in the throat, and then it's a little bit of a question, well, then how are they learning it from our case? Because that's not our case here. I'm going to leave it because, again, I find it hard to explain, so we'll leave it at that. But now here comes the question, and we're going to continue in this sugya. Here the question was asked, and that's why we were trying to say, our sugya proves that it can't possibly be considered the chatzer of the mazik, because otherwise the owner of the dog wouldn't be liable, and the owner of the dog is liable. So that proves it. So now they're going to say, here was the question was asked, and then they bring two answers to try to answer the question there, and they don't answer it. Okay, even though we just said we can answer it from our sugya, but when they asked the question, they didn't have an answer. So let's see. So the first before they bring answers, they're going to say the whole question, it seems absurd. And this actually works better according to Rashi, because then it really is an absurd question, which is, then you would never have a case of shame. According to Tosfot, you would have a case of shame, which is if the dog took it themselves, or the parad, the cat. But, and because he says it's only a problem when it's shoved in the mouth. But okay, anyway, that's why this works according to Rashi, even though, again, other things didn't make sense according to Rashi. So, how would you have a case of shame ever? Because anytime it goes in the mouth of the animal, it's considered, if you say it's the mazik, the mouth of the animal is considered the domain, even if it's standing, Ruth's dog is standing in Naomi's garden, it's still considered Ruth's inside the mouth because the damage is happening in the mouth. In the mouth is considered the animal's property, which means really Ruth's property, which means that you'll never have shame, because shame in your own property is not a problem. So Amar Rav Meri Bered Rav Kahana. So Rav Meri says, no, I'll give you a case. Now you have to remember, what is shame? It's a category, a main category. What's a subcategory of shame? Well, you could have a subcategory of benefiting from something. So, we saw this case before. If the animal rubs up against a wall and destroys the wall a little bit, right, rubs away parts of the wall, it was doing it for enjoyment purposes. So any kind of enjoyment, if the animal's getting enjoyment, then that's called shame, because they're doing it just for pleasure, right? But yet they're destroying. That's shame, as opposed to, let's say, kerem, which is intentionally to damage. Or it's rolling around in the dirt for fun, right? To rub its body or something, feels good, but it's dirtying fruits on the way. So those are two possible cases of shame that would happen, that don't happen in the mouth of the animal, basically. That's the idea. Well, Matkif Lamar Zutra, but Rabbi Zutra says, but you're forgetting. There's other criteria of shame that don't exist in these two cases. But it needs to be like the pasuk where we learned it from, where it has to be totally destroyed, where the tooth consumes it entirely, according to that pasuk. And these are not consumed entirely. You still have a wall, part of it left. You still have fruits, they're just dirty. So Rabina Amal, he's going to give an example, and so is Rav Ashi, Dishaft Salmi. What if there were engraved pictures on the wall? And while the animal rubbed against the wall, for his own pleasure, rubbed off the pictures. Rav Ashi Amar de Pase Pasue, that it stepped on something and totally destroyed the fruits, right? It stepped on the fruits and totally, entirely destroyed them. Okay, so not that they were just dirtied, but they were completely destroyed. So those could be possible cases. So now they've explained why, at least there's a question, even though, again, it's a pretty hard question to really understand why they even have a question like this. But now let's try to bring two sources. So Tashma, let's bring a source from Sanhedrin. I believe it's a Mishnah. Shisabo et hakelev, shisabo et hanachash. Someone entices a dog or a snake to bite. Patul. So now, exempt. Who's exempt? Well, it sounds like man patul, mishase patul. The one who enticed him is exempt. Obviously, the owner of the dog is going to be responsible, or the owner of the snake, right? Now, if you're going to say, now where does the biting happen? In the mouth of the animal. If you're going to say, if you're going to say it's like the property of the owner of the dog or the owner of the snake, when they go to make the owner of the dog responsible, he could say, or she could say, my bayadach bepume de kalba. What's your hand doing in the mouth of my property? So don't blame me for my dog bit your animal. Your arm, your dog put your arm in my dog's mouth. Now again, it's not that they did, but they're kind of saying, if it's my domain, well, what was your thing doing in my domain? So to which they say, maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you're right. Maybe it really, and that would prove Chatzer and Izak, that really the mouth of the animal is not considered the domain of the owner of the animal, because otherwise they'd have this excuse. And others say, no, maybe there's a different reason they have the excuse. Lema, ema patul af mishaseh. In other words, it's not that they have this excuse. Maybe they actually do have this excuse, and maybe they really are exempt. And when it says patul, it didn't say anyone's responsible. We assumed it meant exempt, the enticer's exempt, but that means the owner of the dog is responsible. But now they're saying maybe the owner of the dog, and not only the owner of the dog, because you could say, chatzar mazik, my mouth is my owner's property. What was your hand doing in the owner's property? And even the enticer is exempt. Because now, why is the enticer exempt, by the way? Not to mention, Rashi says it's grama. It's indirect, right? He caused something to happen, but he didn't do it himself. So he's not responsible. Okay, so that's one way to explain. Another way is to say, that you can't prove this from here. There's another way to bite without really being in the animal's mouth. It could be he took his teeth, kind of jutted out of his mouth and bit outside his mouth, and therefore inside the mouth is not considered. It wasn't considered inside the mouth, and therefore this wouldn't teach you anything about the inside of the mouth and what its status is. So we can't use this source to prove anything about our topic. Tashma, next case. He shichbo et hanachash. He caused a snake to bite someone. So what did he do? Okay, let's go back to Ruth and Naomi. Ruth takes Naomi's arm and puts it right in front of the snake's mouth for the snake to bite it. So she basically makes the whole thing happen. Well, Rabbi Yehuda mechayev chachamim potrim. So we have a machloket whether Ruth is responsible or not responsible to pay for the damages. Va'amar of Acha bar Yaakov. Acha bar Yaakov says, Kishetimtza lomar l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda. we're going to basically explain now what the debate between them is. Now, how does a snake, now the idea here is what happened is the snake, when Ruth brought Naomi's arm close to the snake bit Naomi and Naomi died. Now, how does Naomi die from a snake bite? Because the snake has poison in it, which got into Naomi's body. Now, the question is, how does the poison of the snake work? We have a debate about the reality of how things work. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, this is at least Rav Acha bar Yaakov's interpretation. The venom of the snake is in its mouth. And therefore, therefore, who's responsible? The makish, Ruth, who took the snake's mouth and put it right next to Naomi's arm, which obviously the snake was going to bite. Well, that's all Ruth's fault because the venom is in the teeth. So the second that the snake bites, the venom goes into Naomi, and therefore it's fully Ruth's responsibility, and the snake is exempt. What does it mean the snake is exempt? Well, the snake is supposed to get killed. If a shore kills a person, and an ox kills a person, the shore has to get stoned. So this nachash is no different from that. The snake would have to get stoned, but the snake does not, because the snake didn't do it, really. I mean, snake put his mouth there, but the venom was there. So it was the human intervention that caused the death. L'divrei chachamim, and that's why he says chayavim, right, is the makish. L'divrei chachamim usei potrim eres nachash me'atzmo maki. This venom comes out because of the snake. The biting wouldn't do anything unless the snake brings up the venom. Right, maki actually means to vomit, right? He vomits out or spits out the venom. It's not exactly vomit in this case. Lefichach nachash b'skila makish patul. So therefore, the makish isn't responsible for the death. It's really the snake who did it. It took an action of the snake to make it happen. So now, what does this have to do with our topic? Remember, we want to prove, is the mouth of the animal like the domain of the owner? Well, if you say it really belongs to the owner of the snake, so the owner could say, right, let's say the according to the rabbis, where they say it's the snake has to die, you could say, don't kill my snake. What did my snake do? That person stuck right there. What was their arm doing in my domain? The mouth of the snake is my domain. What was it doing there? So then they say, and that's to save the snake, basically. So now they say, to save the snake, we don't save the snake when the snake killed someone. Okay, and this is going to make logical sense because, and we're going to see another case where we see this, because a snake, right, the snake getting killed has two goals. One is the owner is responsible and therefore loses their snake because their snake killed someone and therefore the owner loses their snake. But the second thing is that the snake is dangerous. We can't let dangerous snakes around. So the snake's going to have to die no matter what. Even if the owner could say it's not really my snake's fault, it doesn't really matter. Your snake is now dangerous because it could kill. So now they say menatemer. Where do we see that death is different? And by the way, the case we were talking about earlier, it was all about eating and damage caused by the mouth of the animal. This is different. This is death. Whole different story. How do we know this is a different story? Tanya, it says in a bright. You go into the courtyard of someone else. So Naomi goes in Ruth goes into Naomi's courtyard without permission. And no, in this case, sorry, my mistake. Naomi, I did say it right in the beginning. Naomi goes into Ruth's courtyard without permission. Okay, Naomi wanders in there. And Naomi gets bitten by Ruth's ox and dies in Ruth's domain. Hashur biskila. Okay, the shore gets killed. But there's no need for ransom payment. Why is that? My time. My bite. Right? What were you doing in my domain? Ruth could say, so I don't have to pay. But from that same account, same thing with the shore, though. You should be able to say, Ruth should say, my bite v'rishuti. Why are you killing my shore? What were you doing in my domain? Naomi, nobody invited you to my house. So, but in the end, they say no. When it comes to death, we don't exempt the shore, and that's why the shore is going to be liable, even though Ruth is not going to be. Now we're going to hear a story. Hanu Ize, debate Tarbud, Abu Mafsede Leila Rav Yosef. Okay, these Izim, the way it was working is These Izim belonged to this family, and they were causing damage to Rav Yosef. Amar le Abaye, he said to Abaye, Zil go tell the owners to put away their animals that are causing me problems. Right? They're coming into my field, they're eating my stuff. Amar le, Abaye says back to him. Now Abaye was a student. Abaye says back to him, Amar Ezel, why am I going to go? Diazilna, I know if I go, what are they going to tell me? Amar le ligdor mar gedera ba'are. They're going to tell Rav Yosef to make a fence around his field. And this is a very interesting halacha. Comes out from here that it sounds like that if it's Rav Yosef's responsibility to make a fence, and if he doesn't make a fence and they damage, they're not responsible. Tosfot doesn't like this. Tosfot says, I don't know what you're talking about. Tosfot says in Daf Yachle Lememar Ligdor Mar Gedera Ba'are, he says, Abaye, it wasn't really true la halacha what Abaye was saying. Really, if they come in, they're not supposed to come into other people's property, whether or not the person fences it in or not, whether or not the person fences it in. But Hayanishmat Abaye shelo yachapes lelech l'sham. Says Abaye was just being lazy. He didn't want to do it. So he said to Rav Yosef, oh, they're just going to come with, some argument back to you, basically that. But he basically says it's not fully Rav Yosef's responsibility to put up a fence. Anyway, the story continues. V'i gadal shein d'chiyav rachmaneh mishkachala. Now they say, wait, if Rav Yosef puts up a fence, and if we basically say like Abaye, let's take Abaye literally, not the way Tosfot says, but that every owner has to put up a fence, then there's never going to be a case of shein. Same kind of question we asked before. Because shein means the animal went into my field. How would the animal get into my field if I put a fence up? There's no way they could get in. So now they say, kishachatra. Well, the animal could sneak in somehow. So they say, or inami denafel guda balelia. Or it could be your fence or your wall fell down in the middle of the night and then you weren't there to pick it up and fix it. But theoretically, the responsibility is on the owner to make sure to have a fence. Machris Rav Yosef item Rava, either Rav Yosef or Rabba announced the following thing. Disalkin laelu dunachtin letatai. Okay, it's agreed upon everyone, all the ones who go up to Israel or the ones who come down from Israel to Babylonia. Okay, meaning we all agree about this. Hani ize deshuka demafside. Okay, there's people who they have goats and they want to slaughter them, but they don't want to slaughter them before the day of the shuk because they want to sell it on the day of the shuk, because when the market is open, they're going to get a better price. If you slaughter your animal on Monday afternoon and the shuk is closed already, and the shuk was Monday and Thursday, and you have to wait now 3 days to sell, your meat's going to rot. They have no refrigerators, no freezers. There was no way to preserve the meat. So you want to wait till Thursday and basically, slaughter it either Wednesday night or something like that and have the meat ready to be sold the next morning, or I don't know, that morning. So basically they say people if they want to sell it on Tuesday, they're going to lose money because there's not a lot of people to buy, right? Low supply, right? Low demand, the price is going to go down. So what do? They leave their animals, their goats, laying around, right? But matrim b'marayu trei tlatazimya. Now, if those animals are causing damage in the city, so you can warn them twice or 3 times. Itzai, and if they listen, great. Keep your animals, protect them. Vilo, and if they don't do that, Amrina, and you can take the law into your own hands and say to them, Tiv amsachta bekabel zuzah. Slaughter these right now and take your money and take a loss because I'm not letting you destroy my stuff. It's interesting. You could say you can make them pay the damages that they caused. But first of all, it's a pain to take someone to court and get them to pay the damages. And number 2, it could be you want your stuff. You don't want your stuff destroyed and you'll just get the monetary payment for it. That's annoying. So you have a right, and this is interesting. We're going to get to this more in Sanhedrin. To what extent can someone take the law into their own hands? But you have the right to take the law into your own hands and basically insist that they shech the animal right now and sell it even for a lower price so that they don't damage your items. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. Ezehu tam ve'ezehu mu'ad. What is a short tam? What is a short mu'ad? Now, it doesn't seem to be directly addressing the issue of how many times does it take to get turned into a shor mu'ad, although we will get to that. But what makes something a shor tam after it becomes a shor mu'ad? This we haven't discussed. Theoretically, you could be a shor mu'ad, a dangerous shor, but then you could calm down. So at what point do you calm down? It's an interesting topic in and of itself, right? Same thing for humans. Like if you're a bad person and you can't be trusted, maybe at what point do we begin to trust you again? Also a sugya in Sanhedrin. Anyway, what's a tam? What's a mu'ad? So mu'ad kol she'idu bo shloshah yamim. V'tam yishech zor bo shloshah yamim. Devei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, If they testified about this animal 3 different days, okay, let's say animal was having a really bad day and gored someone 3 times in a day, that doesn't count according to Rabbi Yehuda. Has to be 3 different occasions, 3 different days, the animal gored. Tam, when does it become back to a short time? 3 days where the animal doesn't gore. Now, most of the commentaries say it doesn't just mean like the next 3 days it didn't gore, but it would have to be where it was in a similar situation, kind of like the Rambam talks about doing tshuva. You have to be in a similar situation, right? And then you don't act that way, then we can assume that it's back to being a short time. Rabbi Meir has a different definition. Mu'ad she'idu bo shlosha pa'amim. Mu'ad is, they said 3 times, right, that they warned him. It could be all on the same day. But as long as they, kind of said, oh, your animal gored, now you're forewarned, time number 1. Then they did it again, then they did it again, then it would be a short mu'ad. Vitam, what makes someone a short tam? Kol shiur tinokot, in other words, again, after it already was a mu'ad, how does it go back to being a short tam? Kol shiur tinokot memashmashim bo ve'eino rogeach. If the children play with it and it doesn't gore, then that's a good sign. Now, why children specifically? Some people say because children generally are easy to anger the animals. They don't really know how to deal, and sometimes they get worked up, and then the animal gets worked up, and that causes the animal to gore. So it's a high level of, someone who's irritating the animals the most, and they still don't gore. That's a sign. Some people give other reasons that might mean less, right? Whether this is more or less than Rabbi Yehuda, we don't really know. So now the Gemara says, "My time to Rabbi Yehuda." Start with that for today. Finish here. Amar Rabbi. Tmol chad mitmol tre shilshom tlata. What they're doing is they're darshaning this pasuk about the short time and the shor muad. It says, when you become a shor muad, ono da ki shor nagachu mitmol shilshom v'lo yishmerenu ba'alav shalem shalem shor takal shor v'ameki elo. Okay, what does this mean? If you find out that it was a shor nagach, or he was warned that it was a shor nagach, the shor that does this, mitmol shilshom, from the day before yesterday, and he's not watched, then they have to pay full damages. So now comes Abai and he says, well, there's tmol shilshom, but it also says mitmol shilshom. So tmol is 1, mitmol is like 2, shilshom is another. That ends up 3 days. Okay, that's how he gets to 3 separate days. V'lo yishmerenu ba'alav means that's the 4th time. If the 4th time you don't watch your animal, then that's already you're responsible. That's a shor muad. On the 4th time, Rava Amar, Tmol mitmol chad. There's no drasha of Tmol, mitmol, all that. That's 1. Shilshom is a 2nd. So, right, from the day before yesterday. V'lo yishmerenu ha'idna. And then V'lo yishmerenu is now chayav. You're going to be liable. Now, this sounds, okay, we're going to talk about this. This is very interesting. So, first of all, he says this is all could be happening in the same day because there's Tmol, mitmol, which is, right, and shilshom, that's 2, as if, it could happen. It's just how many times. And then lo yishmerenu is now, meaning it sounds like after 2 times, the 3rd time. And I was careful in the beginning of the Masechet to kind of leave open this possibility, even though then I kind of went into just the typical, which is we know it's 3 times, and then the 4th time is shor muad. But there is a debate about this. There's actually a debate about how to understand Rava. Some people think that Rava means, you can look at Rashi, Rashi says already the 3rd nigicha, according to Rava, you're liable full damages. Okay, which means there's a machloket of Rava. We usually hold like Rava about whether it's the 4th time you're the shor muad or it's the 3rd time, right? Is it after 2 or after 3? That's first of all. Tosfot says that's not true. Okay, he says no. Okay, he thinks that what it means is lo yishmerenu now, then you'll be chayav. Okay, it's just a matter of darshaning the psukim differently. But he still and therefore he doesn't get to 3 separate days, just 3 separate occasions. There's a big debate here how to understand it, which again has huge ramifications. Is a short time after 2, short muad after 2, or is it after 3? Okay, so that's a very interesting machloket. And again, it's not so clear whether Rav and Abai disagree about this. It's really whether, there's different ways to understand the machloket between them. But let's review our dots quickly. We have started with the Isho Mishum Chitzav, according to Rabbi Yochanan. We tried to prove it from a bright and a pasuk. Then we went into, we have a bit of a problem about Tamun, and because of that, we end up having to say that Rabbi Yochanan holds also Chitzav and also Mammon. And then we had to say, well, what's the nafkamina between him and Rabbi Rish Lakish then? Right? First of all, we had the issue of the first part and the second part, right? If let's say there's a gate, right? So the first part, let's say there won't be an issue of tamun, you're going to be liable for everything because that's your cause, but your responsibility, you did it directly. But if the gate falls and you don't fix it up, then you're going to be liable from that point beyond, right, where it spreads beyond that fence, also for things that you won't be liable for things that are hidden, which you will be for the first part. But really, the Gemara said, what's enough? Gemina the arba advarim. If you damage a person, there's going to be ramifications, right? Whether you think it's the person's doing or not the person's doing, but their property's doing. Then we got into the charara. We said who's responsible? The owner of the dog, not the owner of the coal, because they must have been watching the coal. Then they said, where was this done? It was done in the property of the one who damaged. And then we got into this whole thing. Well, then that must prove an answer to our question about the mouth of the para. Is it considered the mouth of the nizak or the mazi? And then we said it has to be the nizak because otherwise you wouldn't be liable here, even though we had some issues with that. And then we brought that sugya where they brought two sources to try to get to an answer about enticing the dog or the snake. In the end, we couldn't really prove it from those, although it does seem pretty, right? They do try to prove it from our sugya, the beginning part of the sugya. Then we got to the izim that were causing problems and about taking the law into your own hands. And then we finished with the tam and the muad. And what's the difference, right? We have two approaches. They have to be on separate days to turn into a shor muad or not necessarily. Could it even be on the same day as long as you're warned 3 times about it? Either which way, you have to be warned 3 times about it. And then the question is, then we have this machloket Abaye and Rava, where Rabbi Yehuda gets it from. By the way, the machloket Abaye and Rava is all about Rabbi Yehuda, who we don't even hold like anyway. But, yeah, 1 second. Oh, actually, maybe we do hold that way. Could be wrong. Yeah. Some people say that the machloket Rava and Abaye about whether it's 4 or 3, if we do think that there's a machloket between them, might be according to both opinions, really. Okay, so leave that as an open question. As I said, it's a bit not clear how to read this, and do they really argue with how many times turns a shor into a shor mu'ad, or not necessarily? Or they're just arguing about how to read these psukim, but that everyone agrees it's 3 times, and only on the 4th time you're going to be a shor mu'ad and liable for full damages. With that, wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, and hoping for good news. Always looking for good news these days.